The gunshot that rang out across the dirt street of Los Animas, Colorado, wasn't meant for her, but Beatrice Turner knew it was only a matter of time before one would be. She clutched the stolen loaf of bread beneath her tattered shawl, her heart hammering against her ribs as the baker's furious shouts echoed behind her. Her bare feet kicked up dust as she ran, the September sun of 1882 beating down mercilessly on her uncovered head. She had made it perhaps 50 yards when strong hands grabbed her shoulders, spinning her around to face the red-faced baker and the growing crowd of townspeople who had gathered to witness her shame. "Thief! Dirty little thief!" the baker bellowed, his jowls quivering with rage. He yanked the bread from her trembling hands, and Beatrice felt tears spring to her eyes despite her best efforts to remain stoic. She was 19 years old and had been alone in this harsh world for 3 months now, ever since the fever took her father and left her with nothing but debts she could never hope to repay. The boarding house had turned her out 2 weeks ago, and she had been sleeping in abandoned buildings ever since, taking whatever work she could find, which was precious little for a woman alone with no references and no family name to speak of. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though her voice was barely audible over the baker's continued tirade. "I was hungry. I haven't eaten in 3 days. That's no excuse for stealing." The baker raised his hand as if to strike her, and Beatrice flinched, closing her eyes and bracing for the blow. It never came. Instead, she heard a new voice, deep and calm, cutting through the chaos like a knife through butter. "How much for the bread?" Beatrice opened her eyes to find herself looking up at the tallest man she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against his worn cotton shirt. His face was tanned and weathered, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble. But it was his eyes that caught her attention most, a startling gray-blue color that seemed to see right through her, assessing her not with judgment but with something that looked almost like concern. He wore a dusty black hat, leather chaps over well-worn denim pants, and a gun belt slung low on his hips, marking him clearly as a working cowboy. The baker sputtered, clearly taken aback by the interruption. "What's it to you, stranger? This girl's a thief, and thieves need to be punished according to the law." "I asked how much for the bread." The cowboy's voice remained level, but there was an edge of steel beneath it that made even the angry baker pause. "She took something that belongs to you. I'm offering to pay for it. Seems like a fair solution to me." 50 cents, no, the baker said, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "That's highway robbery for a single loaf, and you know it," the cowboy replied, but he was already reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a silver coin and flipped it toward the baker, who caught it reflexively. "There's your 50 cents. Now the bread belongs to the lady, doesn't it?" The baker examined the coin, bit it to test its authenticity, then grudgingly nodded. He shoved the loaf back into Beatrice's hands with such force that she nearly dropped it. "Fine, but I don't want to see her face around my shop again, you understand? Next time she steals from me, I'll have the sheriff lock her up." "There won't be a next time," the cowboy said firmly. He turned to Beatrice, and she found herself trapped in that penetrating gaze once more. "Come on, let's get you out of here before this crowd decides they want more entertainment." Beatrice's mind raced with confusion and a dozen questions, but her survival instincts told her that this man, whoever he was, had just saved her from a punishment that could have ranged from a public whipping to time in jail, or worse. She nodded mutely and allowed him to guide her away from the dispersing crowd, his hand resting gently but firmly on her elbow. They walked in silence for several minutes, turning down a side street and then another, until the noise of the main thoroughfare faded behind them. Finally, the cowboy stopped beside a hitching post where a magnificent bay horse stood waiting, its coat gleaming in the sunlight despite the dust that seemed to cover everything else in this town. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen, which he held out to her. "You look like you could use some water." Beatrice's pride warred with her desperate thirst, and thirst won. She took the canteen with shaking hands and drank deeply, the cool water soothing her parched throat. When she had drunk her fill, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and returned the canteen to him, finally finding her voice. "Thank you. For the water and for what you did back there. I'll pay you back somehow, I promise." "I'm not asking for repayment." He studied her with those keen eyes, taking in her ragged dress, her dirty bare feet, the hollow look of hunger in her face. "When's the last time you had a proper meal?" "I don't see how that's any of your concern, mister." She trailed off, realizing she didn't even know his name. "Carter Ashford," he said, touching the brim of his hat in a polite gesture. "I work at the Double R Ranch about 5 miles west of town. And you're right, it's not my concern, but I'm making it my concern anyway. What's your name?" "Beatrice. Beatrice Turner." She clutched the bread to her chest, acutely aware of how she must look to him. This capable man with his clean clothes and well-fed horse and money in his pockets. "I'm not usually like this. I'm not a thief. My father died 3 months ago, and everything just fell apart. I've been trying to find work, but nobody wants to hire a woman alone, especially not one without references or family." Carter nodded slowly, as if he understood far more than she had said. "You got anywhere to stay tonight?" Beatrice hesitated, then shook her head. There was no point in lying. He had already seen her at her lowest point. "All right, then." Carter began untying his horse's reins from the hitching post. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm taking you back to the ranch with me. Mrs. Henderson, the owner's wife, is always complaining about needing help with the house and the cooking for the ranch hands. It's hard work, but it comes with room and board and a fair wage. If you're willing to work, I reckon we can find a place for you." Beatrice stared at him in disbelief. "You're offering me a job? Just like that? You don't even know me." "I know you were desperate enough to steal bread, but honest enough to apologize for it. I know you've got pride, which is why you're hesitating right now instead of jumping at the offer. And I know that everyone deserves a second chance when life knocks them down." Carter swung himself up into the saddle with easy grace, then held out his hand to her. "Now you can come with me, or you can stay here and keep struggling on your own. But I should tell you, Las Animas isn't a kind town to women without protection, and it's only going to get harder as winter comes on." Beatrice looked down at the bread in her hands, then back up at Carter's open, honest face. Every instinct she had been taught about propriety and caution screamed at her not to go off with a strange man, but those instincts came from a world where she had a father to protect her and a roof over her head. That world was gone now. She was living in a new reality, one where she had to make hard choices and trust her gut. And her gut told her that Carter Ashford, for whatever reason, was genuinely trying to help her. She took his hand. It was calloused and strong, and he pulled her up behind him on the horse with seemingly no effort at all. Beatrice had never ridden a horse before, and she had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep from sliding off. Her face pressed against his back. She could feel the solid muscle beneath his shirt, could smell the scent of leather and sage and honest sweat. It should have been uncomfortable or embarrassing, but instead she felt safer than she had in months. "Hold on tight," Carter said, and then they were moving, the horse's powerful stride carrying them out of Las Animas and into the vast Colorado prairie that stretched as far as the eye could see. The ride to the Double R Ranch took almost an hour, and during that time Beatrice watched the landscape roll past with a mixture of fear and wonder. She had spent most of her life in towns, first in Kansas City where she was born, then in smaller settlements as her father's drinking problem forced them to move ever westward in search of fresh starts that never quite materialized. She had never been this far from civilization, surrounded by nothing but grass and sky and the occasional cluster of cottonwood trees marking a creek bed. The isolation was both terrifying and oddly beautiful. Carter didn't speak much during the ride, though once or twice he asked if she was all right or if she needed to stop and rest. Beatrice assured him she was fine, even though her legs were starting to cramp from the unfamiliar position and her stomach was growling so loudly she was certain he must be able to hear it. She forced herself to take small bites of the bread, making it last, knowing she shouldn't gorge herself after days without food. Finally, they crested a small rise, and Beatrice saw the ranch spread out before them in the valley below. It was larger than she had expected, with a big main house painted white, several barns and outbuildings, and a series of corrals where horses milled about. In the distance, she could see cattle grazing on the hillsides, their forms small and dark against the golden grass. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, and as they drew closer, she could see a woman standing on the porch, shading her eyes with her hand as she watched their approach. "That's Mrs. Henderson," Carter said. "Her husband owns the ranch. They're good people, fair employers. Just be honest with them, and everything will work out fine." Beatrice's heart began to pound again as they rode into the ranch yard. Several cowboys looked up from their work to watch them pass, their expressions ranging from curious to suspicious. Carter ignored them all, riding straight up to the main house and dismounting before reaching up to help Beatrice down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, and he steadied her with a hand on her arm. Mrs. Henderson descended the porch steps, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of Beatrice's appearance. She was a woman in her early 50s, Beatrice guessed, with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and a face that looked like it didn't smile often but wasn't unkind either. She wore a practical calico dress and an apron, and there was a smudge of flour on one cheek. "Carter Ashford, what have you brought home now?" Mrs. Henderson's voice was stern, but there was a hint of affection beneath it. "This is Miss Beatrice Turner, madam. She's down on her luck and looking for honest work. I thought you might be able to use some help with the house and the cooking, like you were mentioning just last week." Mrs. Henderson crossed her arms over her chest, her gaze never leaving Beatrice's face. "Is that so? And what experience do you have with housework and cooking, girl?" Beatrice straightened her spine, meeting the older woman's eyes directly. "I've been keeping house since I was 12, madam. My mother died when I was young, and I took over the cooking and cleaning for my father. I can make bread, preserve vegetables, do laundry, mend clothes, and manage a household budget. I'm a hard worker and I learn quickly. I won't give you any trouble, and I'll earn my keep." Ms. Henderson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Well, you got a spine at least. That's something." She circled around Beatrice slowly, examining her from all angles. "You're thin as a rail, and you look like you haven't had a proper bath in weeks, but your speech is educated and you've got good manners despite your current circumstances. How did you end up on the streets?" "My father died of fever 3 months ago in Los Animas. He had debts, and everything we owned was sold to pay them. I've been trying to find work, but people aren't inclined to trust a young woman on her own." Beatrice decided not to mention the bread theft. If Mrs. Henderson found out about it later, so be it, but she wasn't going to volunteer the information. "Your father have a drinking problem?" The question was blunt and unexpected, and Beatrice felt her cheeks flush. "Yes, madam." "And you took care of him anyway, even when he drank away the money you needed for food and rent?" Mrs. Henderson's tone had softened slightly. "He was my father. I didn't have anyone else." Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly, as if this answer satisfied her. She glanced at Carter, who had been standing quietly throughout the exchange. "You vouch for this girl?" "I do, madam." "All right, then." Mrs. Henderson turned back to Beatrice. "Here's the deal. You'll work for room and board for the first month while I evaluate whether you're worth keeping on. If you work out, I'll start paying you $15 a month. You'll share a room with our other housemaid, Jenny, in the small cabin out back. You'll be expected to help with all the cooking and cleaning for the main house, which means meals for me and Mr. Henderson, plus breakfast and dinner for the 12 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse. Laundry is done on Mondays, baking on Tuesdays and Fridays, and you'll help Jenny with whatever other tasks need doing. The work is hard, the hours are long, and I don't tolerate laziness or dishonesty. You break something, you tell me. You make a mistake, you own up to it. You do that and we'll get along fine. Do you accept these terms?" Beatrice wanted to weep with relief. A place to sleep, regular meals, and the promise of wages if she proved herself. It was more than she had dared to hope for. Yes, madam, I accept. Thank you for giving me this chance. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you've survived your first week. But there was a hint of a smile on Mrs. Henderson's face now. She called toward the house. Jenny, come out here, girl. A young woman appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked to be about Beatrice's age, with curly red hair escaping from beneath her cap and a sprinkling of freckles across her nose. Her face was friendly and open, and she smiled when she saw the gathering on the porch. This is Beatrice Turner. She's going to be helping us from now on. Take her to the cabin and get her settled. See if you can find her some proper clothes and shoes, and for heaven's sake, help her get cleaned up before dinner. We can't have her serving food looking like she just crawled out of a ditch. Jenny bounded down the steps, her smile growing wider. Of course, Mrs. Henderson. Come on, Beatrice. I'll show you where we stay. Oh, you're going to love it here. It's hard work, but Mrs. Henderson is fair. And the Cowboys are mostly respectful, and we get to eat the same food as everyone else, which is a lot better than my last position. As Jenny chattered away, leading Beatrice toward a small but neat cabin set apart from the other buildings, Beatrice glanced back over her shoulder at Carter. He was still standing by his horse, watching her go. When their eyes met, he touched the brim of his hat in that same polite gesture from before, and something warm bloomed in Beatrice's chest. She raised her hand in a small wave, then turned back to follow Jenny, her mind whirling with everything that had happened in the past few hours. The cabin was simple but clean, with 2 narrow beds, a small table, a washstand, and pegs on the wall for hanging clothes. Jenny immediately began pulling garments out of a trunk at the foot of her bed, holding up dresses and skirts for Beatrice's inspection. You're taller than me, but I think some of these will fit well enough. Mrs. Henderson is particular about us looking neat and respectable, so she makes sure we have proper clothes. Oh, and here are some shoes. They might be a bit big, but that's better than too small. You can stuff the toes with paper until we can get you fitted for your own pair. Beatrice accepted the clothes with gratitude, running her fingers over the fabric. They were simple work dresses, nothing fancy, but they were clean and whole, without any tears or patches. Jenny also produced a bar of soap, a towel, and a hairbrush, and insisted on helping Beatrice heat water for a proper bath in the tin tub that lived behind a screen in the corner of the cabin. As Beatrice lowered herself into the warm water and began to scrub away 3 months of accumulated dirt and despair, Jenny perched on the edge of her bed and kept up a steady stream of conversation. She had been working at the Double R for 6 months, she explained, after her previous employer had made improper advances and she had been forced to flee in the middle of the night. Mrs. Henderson had taken her in without question, and she had been happy here ever since. The work really is hard, Jenny said frankly. We're up before dawn to start breakfast for the hands, and we don't stop until after dinner is cleaned up. But Mrs. Henderson treats us like people, not servants. She pays fair wages, gives us 1 afternoon off per week, and makes sure the Cowboys know that anyone who bothers us will be out on their ear without a reference. Mr. Henderson is just as good. He's quiet, doesn't say much, but he's decent and honest. What about the Cowboys? Beatrice asked, working soap through her hair. Are they all respectful? Most of them. There's 1 or 2 who might make comments, but nothing you can't handle. And Carter, the one who brought you here, he's the best of the lot. He's the foreman, been working here for 3 years. All the other hands respect him, and he's never once treated me with anything but complete courtesy. You're lucky he was the one who found you. Beatrice thought about Carter's steady gray-blue eyes, his calm voice, the way he had stood between her and the angry baker without hesitation. He seems like a good man. He is. He's also the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties, though he doesn't seem to notice or care. Half the single women in Los Animas have set their caps for him, but he's never shown interest in any of them as far as I know. He just works, takes care of his horse, and keeps to himself mostly. Jenny paused, then added with a mischievous grin, though I did notice the way he looked at you. He looked at me like I was a stray dog that needed help, Beatrice protested, though she felt her cheeks warming. If you say so. Jenny's grin didn't fade. Come on, we need to get you dressed and down to the main house. Mrs. Henderson will want you to start learning the routine right away. No time for wool gathering around here. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Beatrice threw herself into the work with a determination born of gratitude and the very real fear of losing this lifeline she had been thrown. She rose before dawn with Jenny, her body protesting the early hour, and helped prepare enormous quantities of bacon, eggs, flapjacks, and coffee for the hungry ranch hands. She learned where everything was kept in the large, well-organized kitchen, how Mrs. Henderson liked things done, and the particular preferences of the various cowboys who filed through for meals. She scrubbed floors until her hands were raw, kneaded bread until her arms ached, and hauled water until she thought she might collapse. At night, she fell into her narrow bed completely exhausted, too tired even to dream. But gradually, as the days turned into a week and then two, her body began to adapt to the physical labor. The hollows in her cheeks started to fill out as she ate regular meals. Her hands, though rough and calloused now, grew stronger and more capable. Mrs. Henderson watched her like a hawk during those first weeks, appearing suddenly to check on her work, asking sharp questions, testing her knowledge and her patience, but Beatrice could tell that the older woman was beginning to warm to her. She corrected Beatrice when necessary, but also occasionally offered a word of praise when something was done particularly well. That small praise meant more to Beatrice than she could have imagined. Mr. Henderson, when she finally met him properly, turned out to be a tall, weathered man with kind eyes and a quiet demeanor. He spoke little, but always said thank you after meals, and once when he saw her struggling to carry a heavy pot, he had taken it from her without a word and set it where she needed it to be. These small acts of consideration from her employers made Beatrice realize just how lucky she had been to end up here, under Carter's protection and in this household. Carter himself she saw regularly, but rarely had the opportunity to speak with. He came to breakfast and dinner with the other hands, always sitting at the same spot at the long table in the dining hall adjacent to the kitchen. Beatrice served the meals, moving efficiently between the kitchen and the dining area with platters of food and pitchers of coffee. She felt Carter's eyes on her sometimes, though when she glanced up he was usually looking at his plate or listening to the conversation around him. The other cowboys were a mixed group. Most were young men in their 20s and 30s, weathered by outdoor work, with sun-bronzed faces and work-hardened hands. They were generally polite to Beatrice and Jenny, though a few made comments that bordered on flirtatious. Jenny handled these with easy humor, but Beatrice found herself less comfortable with the attention. She was still learning to navigate this new world where she had to work alongside men, serve them food, and occasionally make small talk, all while maintaining the respectability that was her only real protection. It was during the third week that she finally had a real conversation with Carter again. She had been sent out to the vegetable garden behind the main house to pick tomatoes for canning, and she was kneeling among the plants, carefully selecting the ripest fruits when a shadow fell over her. She looked up to find Carter standing there, his hat in his hands. "Miss Turner, I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Mr. Ashford." Beatrice sat back on her heels, shading her eyes against the sun. "Did you need something?" "I wanted to see how you were settling in. I know the work here is demanding, especially for someone who isn't used to ranch life." "I'm managing well, thank you. Mrs. Henderson is tough but fair, and Jenny has been wonderful about showing me the ropes. I'm grateful for the opportunity you provided me." Beatrice meant every word. The terror and desperation she had felt in those first desperate weeks after her father's death were already beginning to fade into memory, replaced by the satisfaction of work well done and the security of knowing where her next meal was coming from. Carter nodded, his eyes serious. "I'm glad to hear it. You've been working hard. I've heard Mrs. Henderson mention more than once how quickly you've picked everything up." "She has?" Beatrice felt a flush of pleasure at this news. "She has, though she'll probably never tell you directly. She's not one for heaping on praise." A small smile played at the corner of Carter's mouth, and Beatrice found herself noticing details she hadn't before, the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he was amused. The strong line of his jaw, the capable hands that held his hat so carefully. "I don't need praise. I just need to earn my keep and prove I'm worthy of the trust you placed in me." "You've more than proven that already." Carter paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I also wanted to make sure you understood that if anyone here gives you trouble, any of the hands or anyone else, you can come to me. As foreman, part of my job is making sure everyone on this ranch is treated with respect. The offer touched Beatrice more than she wanted to admit. She had spent so much of her life being her father's caretaker, being the one who had to be strong and handle everything alone. Having someone offer to stand as her protector with no expectation of anything in return was a new and somewhat overwhelming experience. Thank you, Mr. Ashford. That means a great deal to me. But everyone has been kind so far. I have no complaints. Good. And please, call me Carter. We're not much for formality out here except where Mrs. Henderson insists on it. Then you should call me Beatrice. Beatrice. He said her name slowly as if tasting it. It's a pretty name. Suits you? Before Beatrice could respond to that surprising compliment, they heard Mrs. Henderson calling from the house, her voice sharp with urgency. Carter immediately placed his hat back on his head and touched the brim in his now familiar gesture of farewell. I should let you get back to work, but I'm glad we had a chance to talk, Beatrice. So am I, Carter. She watched him walk away, his long strides carrying him back toward the barns, and found herself smiling for reasons she didn't want to examine too closely. Then she turned her attention back to the tomatoes, trying to ignore the way her heart was beating just a little faster than normal. That evening, as she and Jenny were cleaning up after dinner, Beatrice found herself thinking about Carter more than she should. She had been so focused on survival for so long that she hadn't allowed herself to think about things like attraction or courtship or the possibility of a future that involved more than just getting through each day. But something about Carter's quiet strength and genuine kindness had awakened feelings she had thought long buried beneath the weight of responsibility and loss. You're wool gathering again, Jenny observed, elbowing her gently in the ribs. Let me guess, thinking about a certain tall, handsome foreman? I don't know what you're talking about. But Beatrice knew her flushed cheeks gave her away. He likes you, you know. I've never seen Carter pay this much attention to anyone. He's always been polite but distant with women, like he was keeping himself separate on purpose. But with you, it's different. He watches you when he thinks no one is noticing, and I caught him asking Mr. Henderson about your background the other day. He was probably just making sure I wasn't going to steal the silver, Beatrice said. But her heart wasn't in the joke. Beatrice Turner, for a smart woman, you can be remarkably dense sometimes. That man is interested in you. The question is, are you interested in him? Beatrice scrubbed at a stubborn stain on a pot, considering the question seriously. Was she interested in Carter? Yes. If she was being honest with herself? Everything about him appealed to her, his steadiness, his integrity, his quiet competence. But more than that, she felt safe around him in a way she had never felt safe around any man except her father in his better moments. Carter didn't make her feel like she needed to be constantly on guard or carefully managing someone else's moods. He treated her like she was a person worthy of respect, not a burden or a thing to be used. I might be, she admitted quietly, but I'm in no position to be thinking about such things. I have no money, no family, no prospects. What could I possibly offer someone like him? Oh, Beatrice, Jenny's voice was gentle now. You're thinking about this all wrong. This is the frontier. Out here, what matters is what a person is made of, not what family they come from or how much money they have. You're smart, hardworking, honest, and brave. Those are the qualities that matter. And besides, Carter isn't exactly wealthy either. He's a hired hand, just like you and me. He might be a foreman, but he doesn't own land or have money beyond his wages. If you two were interested in each other, you'd be starting from the same place, building something together. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Beatrice had watched her father's life fall apart because of his weakness and his inability to move past her mother's death. She had promised herself that if she ever married, it would be to someone strong and reliable, someone who could be a true partner rather than another person she had to carry. Could Carter be that person? She barely knew him. And yet something deep inside her whispered that yes, he could be. He already was. I need to focus on my work, Beatrice said finally. Mrs. Henderson hasn't even decided if she's keeping me on permanently yet. Everything else is jumping too far ahead. If you say so. Jenny didn't sound convinced, but she let the subject drop, and they finished the dishes in companionable silence. The next day brought a change in routine. Mrs. Henderson announced at breakfast that she needed to go into Los Animas for supplies and that Beatrice would be coming with her. Beatrice felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of returning to the town where she had been caught stealing, but she kept her expression neutral and simply nodded her agreement. The ride into town in Mrs. Henderson's wagon was interesting. The older woman, usually so focused on work and efficiency, seemed more relaxed away from the ranch. She asked Beatrice questions about her life before her father's death, and Beatrice found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected, talking about her mother's death, her father's decline, the constant moves from town to town as debts piled up. "Your father loved you, in his way," Mrs. Henderson said when Beatrice had finished. "But love isn't always enough. A person has to be strong too, strong enough to put aside their own pain and do right by the people depending on them. Your father couldn't do that, and you paid the price." "I don't blame him anymore," Beatrice said quietly. "He was broken by grief, and he didn't know how to fix himself." "That's gracious of you, but you should also recognize that you deserved better. And now you have a chance to build a better life for yourself. Don't waste it." They arrived in Los Animas mid-morning, and Mrs. Henderson navigated the wagon through the busy streets to the general store. Beatrice helped her load supplies, sacks of flour and sugar, tins of coffee, bolts of fabric, and sundry other items while trying not to think about the last time she had been here, desperate and starving. She kept her head down and worked efficiently, hoping not to be recognized. They were loading the last of the supplies when Beatrice heard a familiar, angry voice. "Well, well, if it isn't the little thief. Got yourself cleaned up and found a protector, did you? I suppose that's one way for a desperate woman to survive." Beatrice turned to find the baker standing a few feet away, his arms crossed over his broad chest and a nasty smile on his face. Several townspeople had stopped to watch the confrontation, clearly eager for entertainment. Before Beatrice could formulate a response, Mrs. Henderson stepped between them, her expression icy. "Are you talking about my employee, sir? Because if you are, I suggest you choose your words more carefully." The baker's eyes widened slightly at the sight of Mrs. Henderson, whom he clearly recognized. "I meant no disrespect, Mrs. Henderson. I was just pointing out that this girl stole from me a few weeks back. A cowboy from your ranch paid for the bread, but that doesn't change the fact that she's a thief." "She was a starving woman who made a desperate choice, and she has more than made up for it through honest work. What is your excuse for humiliating her in the street? Does it make you feel powerful to kick someone when they're down?" Mrs. Henderson's voice was sharp enough to cut glass, and the baker actually took a step back. "I was just saying—" "I know what you were saying, and I'm telling you to stop. Miss Turner is under my protection now, and if I hear that you or anyone else in this town has harassed her, I will make it my business to ensure that the Double R Ranch takes its considerable trade elsewhere. Do I make myself clear?" The baker's face had gone from red to pale. The Double R was one of the largest ranches in the area, and losing their business would be a significant blow. He nodded jerkily. "Yes, madam, crystal clear. I apologize if I gave offense." "Apologize to Miss Turner, not to me." "I apologize, Miss Turner." The words were forced out through gritted teeth, but they came. Beatrice lifted her chin. "Apology accepted. And for what it's worth, I truly am sorry for what I did. I was desperate, but that doesn't excuse it. I'm grateful I was given a chance to make things right." The baker nodded once more, then hurried away, disappearing into his shop. The watching crowd began to disperse, some looking disappointed that there hadn't been more drama. Mrs. Henderson turned to Beatrice, her expression softer now. "Get in the wagon, dear. Let's go home." On the ride back to the ranch, Beatrice struggled to control the emotions churning inside her. "Thank you for defending me, Mrs. Henderson. You didn't have to do that." "Of course I did. You work for me, which means your reputation reflects on mine. Besides, I don't abide bullies, never have. That baker is a small-minded man who likes to feel important by putting others down. Someone needed to remind him that there are consequences for that kind of behavior. Still, I'm grateful. You've been so kind to me, you and Mr. Henderson and Carter. I don't know how I'll ever repay all of you. You repay us by doing good work and living a good life. That's all the payment we need. Mrs. Henderson was quiet for a moment, then added, You know, when Carter first brought you to the ranch, I had my doubts. Not about your character necessarily, but about whether you'd be able to handle the work and the isolation. But you've proven yourself 10 times over in these past weeks. As far as I'm concerned, the trial period is over. The job is yours for as long as you want it. And starting next month, you'll receive full wages. Beatrice felt tears spring to her eyes. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. You won't regret it, I promise. I know I won't. You're a good girl, Beatrice. You've had a rough start, but you've got a bright future ahead of you if you're willing to work for it. And who knows, maybe you'll find more than just work at the Double R. There was a knowing quality to Mrs. Henderson's smile that made Beatrice blush and look away, but she couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her own lips in response. That evening at dinner, Beatrice felt lighter than she had in months. The weight of uncertainty that had been pressing on her shoulders since her father's death had finally lifted. She had a job, a place to live, people who valued her work and treated her with respect. It was more than she had dared to hope for when Carter had found her in that dusty street, desperate and ashamed. As she served the meal, moving between the kitchen and the dining hall with practiced efficiency, she found herself meeting Carter's eyes more than once. Each time he gave her a small smile that made something warm unfurl in her chest. When the meal was finished and she was clearing the plates, he approached her, his hat in his hands as always when he spoke to her indoors. Beatrice, I heard about what happened in town today. Are you all right? I'm fine. Mrs. Henderson handled it beautifully. I'm lucky to have her in my corner. You're lucky to have earned her respect. That's not an easy thing to do. Carter paused, then said, I also heard that she's making your position permanent. Congratulations. Thank you. And thank you again for bringing me here in the first place. You changed my life, Carter. I don't think I can ever properly express how grateful I am. You don't need to thank me. I did what any decent person would have done. That's not true, and you know it. Most people would have walked right past me. You stopped. You helped. You gave me a chance when I had nothing. Beatrice set down the stack of plates she was holding and looked directly at him, letting him see the sincerity in her eyes. You're a good man, Carter Ashford. I hope you know that. For a moment, Carter looked uncomfortable with the praise, but then his expression softened. You make it sound like I did something extraordinary, but the truth is I stopped because something told me I needed to. And I'm glad I listened to that instinct because getting to know you, even in these small ways, has been one of the better things to happen to me in a long while. The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Beatrice felt her heart begin to race, and she knew that something significant was shifting between them, something that went beyond gratitude or simple attraction. But before either of them could say anything more, Jenny appeared in the doorway, calling for Beatrice to come help with the dessert, and the moment passed. Carter stepped back, settling his hat back on his head. I should let you get back to work, but Beatrice, I was wondering if you might like to go for a walk after your chores are done tomorrow evening. There's a nice spot by the creek, and I thought you might enjoy getting away from the buildings for a bit. I'd like that very much, Beatrice said, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. Good. I'll meet you by the garden gate at 7. He left then, and Beatrice returned to the kitchen in a daze. Jenny took one look at her face and grinned knowingly, but Beatrice shook her head, not ready to talk about it yet. She needed to process what had just happened, the invitation that felt like so much more than a simple walk. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Beatrice went through her tasks mechanically, her mind constantly drifting to the evening ahead. She second-guessed her agreement to meet Carter, worried that she was being foolish or presumptuous. What if she had misread his intentions? What if this was just a friendly gesture and she was building it up into something it wasn't? But then she would remember the way he had looked at her. The warmth in his voice when he said getting to know her had been one of the better things to happen to him, and her doubts would quiet. Jenny, of course, noticed her distraction and teased her mercilessly throughout the day. You're going to add salt instead of sugar to something if you don't pay better attention. What is you so scattered? Carter asked me to go for a walk with him this evening. Jenny's eyes went wide, and she let out a small squeal of delight. I knew it. I knew he was interested. Oh, Beatrice, this is wonderful. You have to tell me everything that happens when you get back. Nothing is going to happen. We're just taking a walk. Right, just a walk. With the most eligible bachelor on the ranch who has never asked any woman to go anywhere with him in all the time I've been here. Completely innocent and meaningless. Jenny's sarcasm was thick, but her smile was genuine. You like him, don't you? I do, Beatrice admitted. I know it's too soon, and I barely know him. But there's something about him that just feels right. Does that sound foolish? Not even a little bit. Sometimes you just know. My mother used to say that when you find the right person, it's like recognizing someone you've known your whole life, even if you've just met. Maybe that's what this is for you and Carter. The idea sent a shiver down Beatrice's spine, equal parts excitement and terror. She had never been courted before, had never had time for romance with all the responsibilities of caring for her father. This was entirely new territory, and she had no idea how to navigate it. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wanted to find out. When 7 o'clock finally arrived, Beatrice had changed into her best dress, brushed her hair until it shone, and scrubbed her hands to remove any trace of kitchen work. Her reflection in the small mirror in the cabin showed a woman who looked nothing like the desperate creature who had stolen bread just a few weeks ago. Her cheeks had filled out, her eyes were clear and bright, and there was a hope in her expression that had been missing for far too long. Carter was waiting by the garden gate as promised, and when he saw her approaching, his face lit up in a way that made Beatrice's stomach flutter. He was cleaned up too, she noticed, his hair still damp from washing and his shirt fresh. He held out his arm, and she took it, allowing him to lead her away from the buildings and down a well-worn path that led toward a line of cottonwood trees in the distance. They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, listening to the evening sounds of the ranch winding down for the day. The sun was lowering toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and orange. Beatrice had never paid much attention to sunsets before, too busy with the immediate concerns of survival, but now she found herself appreciating the simple beauty of it. This is my favorite time of day, Carter said, as if reading her thoughts. When the work is done and everything gets quiet, out here you can actually hear yourself think. It's beautiful, Beatrice agreed. I never spent much time outdoors in the evenings before. My father didn't like me being out after dark, said it wasn't safe. He was probably right in town, but out here, as long as you don't wander too far, it's peaceful. I've always felt more at home outside than in. They reached the creek, and Beatrice saw what Carter meant about it being a nice spot. The water burbled over smooth rocks, and the cottonwoods provided shade and a sense of privacy. There was a large flat boulder near the bank, and Carter helped her climb up to sit on it, then settled beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. I wanted to talk to you away from everyone else, Carter began, his eyes on the water. At the ranch, there's always someone around, always work to be done. But I've been wanting to get to know you better, Beatrice, to understand who you really are beyond the circumstances that brought you to us. What do you want to know? Everything. He turned to look at her then, and the intensity in his gaze took her breath away. What makes you happy? What you dream about? What you want out of life? I know that's a lot to ask, especially since we hardly know each other, but I feel like I need to understand you. Beatrice took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. I don't know if I have big dreams anymore. I used to when I was younger. I wanted to go to school, maybe become a teacher. But then my mother died, and everything changed. My father needed me, and I couldn't leave him. After a while, I stopped thinking about what I wanted and just focused on surviving each day, even now. With everything that's happened, I'm still learning how to think beyond just getting through. That's understandable. You've been in survival mode for a long time, but you're safe now. You have a job, a place to live, people who care about you. Maybe it's time to start thinking about what comes next. What comes next? Beatrice echoed. I suppose I'll keep working, save my wages, and try to build some kind of future for myself. But I have to admit, I don't really know what that future looks like. I've never had the luxury of planning ahead. Carter nodded slowly, then seemed to gather his courage. Can I tell you what I see when I look at you? If you want to. I see someone brave. Someone who survived things that would have broken a lesser person. You lost everything, hit the absolute bottom, and instead of giving up, you kept fighting. That takes incredible strength. He paused, then continued. I also see someone kind. You could have become bitter and angry about what life dealt you, but you didn't. You still have compassion and grace. And I see someone I'd like to get to know a whole lot better if you'll let me. Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes at his words. She had spent so long thinking of herself as a failure, as someone who couldn't even keep herself fed, that hearing Carter describe her with such admiration and respect was almost overwhelming. Why me? You could have your pick of women. Jenny says half the single ladies in Los Animas have been trying to catch your attention for years. Carter shrugged. I've never been interested in those women. They're nice enough, I suppose, but they don't see me. They see a foreman, someone with a steady job and prospects. They don't know what it's like to struggle, to have to fight for every little thing. But you do. You understand what it means to work hard and to value the things you've earned. That's important to me. You've struggled too? Beatrice asked softly. My whole life. I grew up poor, one of 6 children. My father was a sharecropper who drank away what little money we had. Sound familiar? He gave a rueful smile. I left home when I was 15, worked my way west doing whatever jobs I could find. I've been a farmhand, a miner, a railroad worker. I've gone hungry more times than I can count. Finally ended up here 5 years ago, and Mr. Henderson saw something in me, I guess. Promoted me to foreman 3 years back. But I've never forgotten where I came from or how hard it was to get here. I had no idea, Beatrice said. You always seem so confident and capable. That's because I know what I'm doing now. I found something I'm good at, and I work hard to keep it. But it took a long time to get to this point, and there were plenty of moments when I thought I'd never amount to anything. Carter turned to face her fully, taking her hand in his. What I'm trying to say is, I understand you. Beatrice. I know what you've been through because I've been through something similar. And I admire the hell out of you for surviving it and coming out the other side still able to smile. Beatrice looked down at their joined hands, his larger and more calloused than hers, but warm and strong. I don't know what to say. I came out here thinking this was just a friendly walk, but you're telling me things that feel very significant. That's because they are significant. I'm not good at dancing around things, so I'm just going to be direct. I like you, Beatrice. I've liked you from the moment I saw you in that street, and the more I've gotten to know you, the more that liking has grown into something deeper. I'm not asking for any promises or commitments right now. I just want the chance to court you properly, to spend time with you and see where this might lead. Is that something you'd be interested in? Beatrice's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Carter must be able to hear it. This was everything she had been hoping for but had been afraid to acknowledge. Yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'd be very interested in that. The smile that spread across Carter's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. He squeezed her hand gently. Good. That's real good. We'll take it slow, do this right. I want everyone to know that my intentions toward you are honorable. They sat together on the rock as the sun set, talking about everything and nothing. Carter told her stories about growing up with 5 siblings, about the various adventures and misadventures that had brought him west. Beatrice found herself sharing memories she hadn't thought about in years, good memories of her mother before she died, of happy times before her father's drinking took over their lives. It felt liberating to share these parts of herself with someone who understood, who didn't judge, who simply listened and accepted. When the sky began to darken in earnest, Carter helped her down from the rock, and they walked slowly back toward the ranch, neither wanting the evening to end. At the garden gate, he released her hand reluctantly. "Thank you for agreeing to spend time with me," he said. "Thank you for asking. This was wonderful, Carter. I haven't felt this happy in longer than I can remember." "Then we'll have to do it again soon," Maybe Sunday afternoon, if you have time off? I'd like that. He hesitated, then leaned down and placed the gentlest of kisses on her forehead. Good night, Beatrice. Good night, Carter. She practically floated back to the cabin, and when Jenny immediately pounced on her for details, Beatrice found herself laughing and sharing everything, unable to contain her joy. It felt like a fairy tale, like something impossible had somehow become real. And as she lay in bed that night staring up at the dark ceiling, Beatrice allowed herself to hope for a future that included not just survival, but happiness. The next few weeks were some of the best of Beatrice's life. She and Carter fell into a pattern of evening walks and Sunday afternoon outings, stealing whatever time they could to be together. They talked endlessly, sharing their thoughts and dreams and fears. They laughed together, finding humor in small things, and slowly, gradually, what had started as attraction and admiration deepened into something that felt a lot like love. The entire ranch seemed to be aware of their courtship, though opinions were mixed. Most of the hands were happy for Carter, teasing him good-naturedly about finally finding a woman who could put up with him. Mrs. Henderson watched the development with approval, occasionally giving Beatrice knowing looks when Carter lingered after meals to help with dishes, something he had never done before. Mr. Henderson simply nodded his acceptance, which was high praise from such a taciturn man. There were a few dissenting voices. One ranch hand, a surly man named Jake, who had been passed over for the foreman position when Carter was promoted, made snide comments about Beatrice being a gold digger who was using Carter to secure her position. But Carter shut that down swiftly, informing Jake in no uncertain terms that such disrespect would not be tolerated. Jake left the ranch 2 days later, and Beatrice felt guilty about it until Carter assured her that Jake had been on thin ice for months due to laziness and poor attitude, and her involvement had simply been the final straw. As summer gave way to fall, the work on the ranch intensified. There was hay to cut and store, cattle to round up and prepare for market, and endless maintenance on buildings and equipment before winter arrived. Carter worked long hours, often from before dawn until well after dark, and there were days when Beatrice barely saw him except at meals. But even exhausted and covered in dust or mud, he always made time to smile at her, to exchange a few words, to let her know he was thinking of her. In October, Carter asked if Beatrice would like to accompany him into Los Animas for the autumn festival. It was a major social event, he explained, with dancing and food and games. He wanted to take her as his official companion, making their courtship public knowledge not just on the ranch, but in the town as well. Beatrice agreed immediately, though she felt a flutter of nervousness. She had only been back to Los Animas a few times since that first trip with Mrs. Henderson, and always for practical purposes. This would be different. A social occasion where she would be on Carter's arm, subject to the scrutiny and judgment of the townspeople who remembered her as a thief. Mrs. Henderson, however, would hear none of her concerns. She produced a beautiful dress from a trunk in her room, a deep blue cotton with delicate white trim that brought out the color of Beatrice's eyes. "This was mine when I was your age," she explained. "I was saving it for a special occasion, and this seems like it fits the bill. You'll wear this to the festival and hold your head high. You have nothing to be ashamed of, Beatrice. You made a mistake when you were desperate, but you've more than redeemed yourself through hard work and honest living. Anyone who can't see that isn't worth your concern." The day of the festival dawned bright and clear, with the crisp coolness that marked autumn in Colorado. Beatrice dressed carefully, Jenny helping her with her hair, pinning it up in a style that was more elegant than her usual practical braid. When she emerged from the cabin, Carter was waiting by the wagon, looking handsome in a clean white shirt and his best vest. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Beatrice, you look beautiful." She felt herself blush with pleasure. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." The ride into town was pleasant, the wagon seat bringing them close enough that their shoulders brushed with every bump in the road. Carter pointed out various landmarks, telling her stories about the area's history and his own experiences. By the time they arrived in Los Animas, Beatrice felt relaxed and happy. ready to face whatever the day might bring. The town square had been transformed for the festival, with colorful bunting hanging from every available surface and numerous stalls selling food and crafts. A raised platform had been erected for dancing, and musicians were already playing lively tunes that made Beatrice's feet want to move. Everywhere she looked, people were laughing and talking, dressed in their finest clothes and clearly enjoying the break from their usual routines. Carter helped her down from the wagon and offered his arm, which she took gladly. They strolled through the festival, stopping to look at various displays and sample treats. Carter bought her a stick of peppermint candy, which made her laugh because it seemed like such a courting cliché, but she appreciated the gesture nonetheless. They encountered several people Carter knew, and he introduced Beatrice to each one, his pride in having her on his arm clear in his voice and demeanor. Most people were polite and welcoming, though Beatrice caught a few curious or judgmental looks. She held her head high, remembering Mrs. Henderson's words, and focused on enjoying the day rather than worrying about what others might think. When the dancing started, Carter led her to the platform without hesitation. Beatrice had learned to dance as a girl, but it had been years, and she stumbled through the first song, apologizing profusely each time she stepped on Carter's toes, but he just laughed and held her steady, telling her she was doing fine, and by the second dance she had found her rhythm. They whirled across the floor, and Beatrice felt something inside her unfurl with pure joy. This was what it felt like to be young and carefree, to have someone who cared about her, to have a future that held promise instead of just more struggle. After several dances, they took a break, finding a quiet spot at the edge of the square where they could catch their breath and watch the festivities. Carter bought them each a lemonade, and they sipped in companionable silence, their shoulders touching as they stood side by side. "Having a good time?" Carter asked. "The best time. Thank you for bringing me, Carter. This is wonderful." "I'm glad. I've been looking forward to this all week, getting to show you off, spending a whole day with you without work interrupting. It's pretty close to perfect." He paused, then added more quietly, "You know, a few months ago I couldn't have imagined this. I was content with my life, I suppose, but I didn't really see a future beyond just more of the same. And then I saw you in that street, and something changed. You changed everything, Beatrice." She turned to look at him, seeing the honesty and emotion in his face. "You changed everything for me, too. You saved my life, Carter, not just by paying for that bread and giving me a job, but by making me believe that I was worth saving, that I deserved more than just survival. You deserve everything good this world has to offer, and I want to be the one to give it to you, if you'll let me." Carter reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. "I know this might be too soon, and if it is, just say so and we'll wait. But I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He opened the box to reveal a simple silver ring with a small stone set in the center. It wasn't fancy or expensive, but it was beautiful in its simplicity, and Beatrice felt her eyes fill with tears as she realized what he was asking. "Beatrice Turner, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you as happy as you've made me these past months?" Around them, the festival continued, people laughing and dancing and living their lives. But for Beatrice, everything had narrowed to this moment, this man, this question that would determine her entire future. She thought about how far she had come since that desperate day when she had stolen bread, about the person she had been then and the person she was now. She thought about Carter's kindness and strength, about the way he made her feel safe and valued, about the future they could build together. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes, Carter, I'll marry you." His whoop of joy startled several nearby festival goers, and then he was picking her up and spinning her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he took the ring from the box and slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "I love you, Beatrice. I should have said that first, but I love you with everything I am." "I love you too, Carter, so much." He kissed her then, right there in the middle of the festival with half the town watching, and Beatrice didn't care one bit. Let them see. Let them know that she was loved and cherished, that she had found her place in the world. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she saw that a small crowd had gathered around them, and several women were wiping tears from their eyes. "Congratulations!" someone called out, and then others were echoing the sentiment. And before Beatrice knew what was happening, people were coming up to shake Carter's hand and offer their best wishes. Even the baker was there, looking uncomfortable but sincere, as he congratulated them and told Beatrice he hoped she would be very happy. The rest of the festival passed in a blur of celebration. News of their engagement spread quickly, and everywhere they went, people stopped them to offer congratulations. By the time they loaded back into the wagon for the ride home, Beatrice's face hurt from smiling and her heart felt like it might burst with happiness. "That went well, I think," Carter said with a grin as they left Los Animas behind. "Better than well, it was perfect." Beatrice looked down at the ring on her finger, still hardly believing this was real. "When did you buy this? When were you planning to propose?" "I've had the ring for 3 weeks, been carrying it around, waiting for the right moment. Today just felt right." Carter reached over and took her hand, linking their fingers together. "We should probably talk about practical things, like when we want to get married and where we'll live." "I haven't thought that far ahead yet. My mind is still catching up with the fact that you proposed. Well, as far as I'm concerned, the sooner the better. But I know there are things to plan, and I want you to have the wedding you want. As for living arrangements, I've been saving my wages for years. I have enough to build us a small house on ranch land if Mr. Henderson will allow it. I'll need to ask his permission, but I don't think he'll object. He's always encouraged his long-term hands to put down roots." Beatrice felt another surge of love for this man who had already thought through the practicalities, who was planning their future with the same care and attention he brought to everything he did. "I don't need anything fancy, Carter. I just want to be with you, to build a life together. Whether that's in a big house or a small cabin doesn't matter to me. You say that now, but wait until you've lived through a Colorado winter in close quarters with me. You might change your mind." But his smile was warm, and Beatrice knew he was as happy as she was. When they returned to the ranch, word of their engagement had somehow preceded them. Mrs. Henderson was waiting on the porch, and when Beatrice climbed down from the wagon, the older woman pulled her into a rare hug. "I'm so happy for you, dear. You and Carter are well suited. You'll make a good life together." "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson, for everything. If you hadn't taken a chance on me, none of this would have been possible." "Nonsense. You earned your place here through your own merits. I just provided the opportunity." Mrs. Henderson pulled back, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You've become like a daughter to me these past months. I couldn't be more pleased that you'll be staying on as part of the ranch family." The next few weeks were busy with wedding preparations. Beatrice and Carter decided on a November wedding, giving them time to prepare, but not so long that they had to wait through the entire winter. Mrs. Henderson threw herself into the planning with unexpected enthusiasm, helping Beatrice sew a wedding dress and organizing a celebration dinner for after the ceremony. Mr. Henderson gave his blessing for Carter to build a house on ranch land, even offering to provide some of the materials and allowing the other hands to help with construction during their free time. The house began to take shape quickly, a sturdy 3-room structure positioned near the creek where Carter had first told Beatrice he wanted to court her. Every evening after work, Carter labored on the house, and often Beatrice would walk down to watch him, bringing him water and helping where she could. "This is going to be our home," Carter would say, standing in the middle of the half-finished structure and gesturing to show where things would be. "Kitchen here, bedroom here, and a sitting room for when we have guests. It's not much, but it's ours, built with our own hands." "It's perfect," Beatrice would assure him, and she meant it. The house represented everything she had never dared to dream of. A permanent place that belonged to her, that no one could take away, where she could build a future with the man she loved. The wedding took place on a crisp November morning, with the mountains in the distance dusted with the first snow of the season. They were married by the traveling minister who made rounds through the area in a simple ceremony held in the Double R's main house, with all the ranch hands and several people from town in attendance. Beatrice wore her homemade dress of white cotton, and Carter wore his best suit. Jenny stood as her attendant, and Mr. Henderson stood up for Carter. As Beatrice said her vows, looking into Carter's eyes and promising to love and honor him for the rest of her life, she thought about how much had changed since that desperate day when she had stolen bread. She had gone from having nothing and no one to having everything that mattered. The love of a good man, a place where she belonged, and a future full of promise. When Carter slipped the matching wedding band onto her finger, next to her engagement ring, she felt a sense of completeness she had never experienced before. "I love you, Mrs. Ashford," Carter whispered after the minister pronounced them husband and wife. "I love you too, Mr. Ashford," Beatrice replied. And then they were kissing, sealing their promises in front of everyone who mattered to them. The celebration that followed was joyous and heartfelt. Mrs. Henderson had outdone herself with the food, and there was music and dancing and laughter. Beatrice danced with Carter, with Mr. Henderson, with several of the ranch hands who were brave enough to ask. She felt beautiful and cherished and completely happy. When someone proposed a toast to the new couple, wishing them health and happiness and many children, Beatrice blushed but smiled, thinking about the family she and Carter would create together. As the sun began to set, Carter swept Beatrice up into his arms, amid cheers and catcalls from the assembled guests, and carried her down to their new house. He had spent the previous evening moving in furniture and supplies, making sure everything was ready for their first night as husband and wife. When he set her down inside and closed the door behind them, shutting out the rest of the world, Beatrice felt a moment of nervousness, but it was quickly overwhelmed by the love and trust she felt for this man who was now her husband. "Welcome home, Beatrice," Carter said softly. "Welcome home, Carter," she echoed. And then they were in each other's arms, beginning the first night of their new life together. The winter that followed was hard, as Colorado winters always were, but Beatrice had never been happier. Their little house proved warm and cozy, and she took pleasure in keeping it neat and comfortable, in cooking meals just for Carter instead of for a whole crew of hungry men. She continued to help Mrs. Henderson when needed, but her primary responsibility now was to her own household, her own husband. Carter was everything she could have hoped for in a partner. He was patient and kind, hardworking and honest. They fell into comfortable rhythms together, learning each other's habits and preferences, navigating the small conflicts that arose and finding ways to compromise. On cold winter evenings, they would sit by the fire, Carter reading or mending tack while Beatrice sewed or knitted, and the simple domesticity of it all filled her with contentment. In January, Beatrice began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Carter, nervous about his reaction. But when she finally shared the news one evening over dinner, his face lit up with a joy so pure it took her breath away. "A baby? We're going to have a baby?" He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her gently as if she were made of glass. "Oh, Beatrice, this is wonderful. Are you feeling all right? Do you need anything? Should you be resting more?" She laughed at his sudden protectiveness. "I'm fine, Carter. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'm healthy and strong, and everything will be fine." But Carter insisted on treating her like precious cargo for the remainder of her pregnancy, much to her exasperation and secret pleasure. He took over many of the heavier household tasks, brought her little treats from town, and made sure she rested regularly. Mrs. Henderson was equally solicitous, adjusting Beatrice's work schedule and sharing advice from her own experience as a mother, though her children were now grown and living back east. The baby, a boy, was born in August of 1883, delivered with the help of Mrs. Henderson and the town's midwife. It was a long and difficult labor, and there were moments when Beatrice thought she might not survive, but Carter stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and offering encouragement. When she finally held her son in her arms, seeing Carter's eyes reflected in that tiny face, she felt a love so overwhelming it brought tears streaming down her cheeks. "What should we name him?" Carter asked, his voice thick with emotion as he gazed at his son. I was thinking James, after my father. Despite everything, he loved me in his way, and I'd like to honor that. James Carter Ashford. That's perfect. Hello, James. Welcome to the world, son. Carter gently touched the baby's tiny hand, and James immediately wrapped his fingers around Carter's much larger one. He's so small. I'm afraid I'll break him. You won't break him. You're going to be a wonderful father, Carter. I've never been more certain of anything. And she was right. Carter took to fatherhood with the same dedication and care he brought to everything else. He would rise in the night to help with feedings, would rock James for hours when the baby was fussy, and as James grew, Carter was endlessly patient in teaching him about the world around them. Watching her husband with their son, Beatrice fell in love with him all over again. The years that followed were full and rich. James grew into a curious, energetic boy who idolized his father and followed him everywhere he could. 2 years after James was born, Beatrice gave birth to a daughter they named Mary, who had her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn determination. And 2 years after that, another son arrived, whom they named Samuel. The little house by the creek expanded as the family grew, with Carter adding rooms as they needed them. Beatrice's days were full of the happy chaos of raising children, cooking meals, keeping house, and helping out at the main ranch when she could. Carter eventually became part owner of the Double R when Mr. Henderson decided to semi-retire. And together Carter and Beatrice built a life of stability and prosperity that neither could have imagined in those early desperate days. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Carter took Beatrice back to the spot by the creek where he had first asked to court her. The children were safely in Jenny's care for the afternoon, giving them a rare few hours alone together. "Do you remember that night?" Carter asked as they sat on the same rock where they had sat so many years before. "Of course I remember. You told me you wanted to get to know me better, and I thought my heart was going to beat right out of my chest." "I was terrified you'd say no. I'd never felt about anyone the way I felt about you, and I was sure I was going to mess it all up somehow." Carter took her hand, running his thumb over the wedding band she still wore. "Sometimes I still can't believe how lucky I got that day I saw you in Los Animas." "I'm the lucky one, Carter. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You gave me hope when I had none. You showed me what it means to be truly loved, and you gave me a family and a home. You gave me a life worth living. We gave each other that. That's what marriage is supposed to be, I think. Two people lifting each other up, making each other better, building something together that neither could have built alone." Beatrice leaned her head on his shoulder, looking out at the creek and thinking about everything they had been through together. The struggles and triumphs, the ordinary days, and the extraordinary moments, all of it woven together into a life she treasured beyond measure. "I love you, Carter Ashford, today and every day." "I love you too, Beatrice, always and forever." They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun moved across the sky. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something beautiful from the ashes of their separate pasts. The Wild West could be a harsh and unforgiving place, but it was also a place where second chances were possible, where love could bloom in unexpected places, and where two people determined to build a better life could actually succeed. As they walked back to their house, hand in hand, Beatrice thought about the young woman she had once been, desperate and alone and stealing bread to survive. That woman would never have believed that happiness like this was possible. But life had a way of surprising you, of bringing you exactly what you needed when you needed it most. Carter had been her salvation, but more than that, he had been her partner in creating a life filled with love and purpose and joy. The children came running when they saw their parents approaching, James and Mary and little Samuel all talking at once, eager to share what they had been doing. Carter scooped Samuel up onto his shoulders while James grabbed his hand and Mary attached herself to Beatrice's skirts. They walked the rest of the way home as a family, and Beatrice's heart was so full she thought it might overflow. That evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Beatrice stood at the window looking out at the stars scattered across the vast Colorado sky. Carter came up behind her. wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on top of her head. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything. How far we've come. How blessed we are. How grateful I am for every single day. Sometimes it still feels like a dream. If it's a dream, I hope I never wake up." Carter turned her in his arms so she was facing him. "You know what I think about sometimes? I think about all the little choices that had to happen for us to find each other. If I had taken a different job, if I'd gone into town on a different day, if I'd walked down a different street, any one of those things could have changed everything. But they didn't. We found each other exactly when we were supposed to. I believe that was meant to be, Carter. Some things are just fate. Maybe you're right. All I know is that I thank God every day that I walked down that street and saw you. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Beatrice Ashford. You and our children and this life we've built together. And you're the best thing that ever happened to me. You saw me when I was at my absolute lowest. And instead of judging me or turning away, you reached out your hand and pulled me up. You gave me everything." They stood together in the quiet house, holding each other close, two souls who had found their way home. Outside, the wind whispered through the cottonwood trees, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. The Wild West continued its endless cycle of harshness and beauty, struggle and triumph, but inside their little house by the creek, there was only love and warmth and the promise of all the tomorrows yet to come. Years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. The children grew and thrived, each developing their own personalities and dreams. James inherited his father's skill with horses and his mother's quick mind. Mary proved to be artistic and compassionate, always the first to comfort someone who was hurt or sad. Samuel was the adventurous one, constantly getting into mischief but charming his way out of trouble with his infectious grin. Carter and Beatrice grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They weathered droughts and hard winters, celebrated good harvests, and mourned losses. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson eventually retired completely, moving back east to be near their own children, and Carter took over full ownership of the Double R Ranch with Beatrice as his partner in all things. The ranch prospered under their management, earning a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. They hired good people and treated them well, remembering how important that kindness had been when Beatrice had needed it most. Several times over the years, they took in people who were down on their luck, giving them the same chance that Carter had once given Beatrice. Jenny married one of the ranch hands, a quiet man named Tom who adored her, and they built a house on the ranch as well, raising their own family close by. The children all grew up together, and the ranch became a true community, a place where people looked out for each other and celebrated life's milestones together. On a warm spring day in 1903, when Beatrice was 40 years old and Carter was 42, they sat on the porch of their now substantial house and watched their grandchildren play in the yard. James had married a school teacher named Sarah, and they had two young daughters. Mary had married a rancher from the next county, and they had a son. Samuel, still unmarried, but courting a girl from town, visited regularly and was the favorite uncle to all the children. "Can you believe it's been 21 years since we got married?" Beatrice asked, watching Carter as he whittled a toy horse for one of the grandchildren. His hair was gray now, and there were lines around his eyes, but he was still the same strong, capable man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. 21 years, 3 children, 5 grandchildren, and more blessings than I can count. It's been a good life, Beatrice. Better than I ever thought possible. Do you ever think about that day in Los Animas when you found me? All the time. That was the day my real life started. Everything before that was just me drifting, waiting for something I didn't even know I needed. Carter set down his whittling and took her hand. You know what I've learned in all these years? That kindness matters. That one small act of compassion can change the entire course of a person's life. If I had walked past you that day, both our lives would have been so much poorer. You would have ended up in jail or worse, and I would have gone on alone, never knowing what I was missing. Instead, we found each other. We built this. Beatrice gestured at the house, the land, the children playing happily in the yard. We created a family and a legacy that will outlast us. That's the thing about love, isn't it? It doesn't just affect the two people involved. It ripples outward, touching everyone around them. Our children will carry what we've taught them into their own families. They'll show the same kindness and compassion to others that we've tried to show. That's how you change the world, one small act of love at a time. Beatrice leaned her head on Carter's shoulder, watching the sun paint the Colorado sky in shades of gold and pink. She thought about the young woman she had been, terrified and starving, stealing bread because she saw no other choice. She thought about how many times her life could have gone wrong, how easily she could have ended up destitute or worse. But then she thought about Carter's hand reaching out to her, steady and sure, pulling her back from the brink and showing her that there was still goodness in the world. I love you, Carter Ashford. Thank you for seeing me, for believing in me, for building this beautiful life with me. I love you too, Beatrice. Thank you for saying yes to that first walk, for taking a chance on a cowboy who had nothing to offer but his heart and his hands. You made me a better man. We made each other better. That's the whole point. They sat together as the evening deepened, watching their grandchildren play and their children tend to the ranch that would one day be theirs. The Wild West was changing, becoming less wild and more civilized with each passing year. But some things remained constant. Love, family, the satisfaction of work well done and a life well lived. When the last rays of sunlight faded and the stars began to emerge, Carter and Beatrice went inside together, hand in hand as they had been for more than 2 decades. Their house was filled with the sounds and smells of family, with love in every corner and memories in every room. That night, as they prepared for bed, Beatrice looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Gone was the gaunt, desperate girl who had stolen bread to survive. In her place was a woman who had lived and loved and built something meaningful. A woman who had raised children and run a household and helped manage a successful ranch. A woman who had learned that her past did not define her future, that one bad day did not make a bad person, and that redemption was always possible if you were brave enough to accept help when it was offered. What are you thinking about, Ree? Carter asked, coming up behind her and meeting her eyes in the mirror. I'm thinking about how grateful I am for you, for our family, for this life. I'm thinking about how none of this would exist if you hadn't stopped that day, hadn't seen past the thief to the person underneath. I saw you, Beatrice, just you, and I knew immediately that you were someone special. Someone worth knowing. Best decision I ever made, stopping to help you that day. Best decision I ever made was letting you. They climbed into bed, and Carter pulled Beatrice close, her back against his chest, his arms secure around her waist. It was a position they had slept in for 21 years, familiar and comforting, a physical manifestation of their emotional connection. Good night, my love, Carter murmured against her hair. Good night, Beatrice replied, smiling in the darkness. And as she drifted off to sleep, safe in her husband's arms, in the house they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created, Beatrice Turner Ashford felt a contentment so profound it was almost overwhelming. This was what she had been searching for all those years ago when she had been so desperate and lost, not just survival, but a reason to survive. Not just food and shelter, but home and belonging and love. The story that had begun with an act of theft and ended with an act of kindness had become something neither Carter nor Beatrice could have predicted. It had become a testament to the power of compassion, the possibility of redemption, and the transformative nature of love. 2 lonely souls had found each other in the vast expanse of the Wild West, and together they had created a legacy that would echo through generations. They lived many more years together, growing old side by side, watching their children and grandchildren flourish, continuing to build on the foundation they had laid. And when people asked them the secret to their long and happy marriage, they always gave the same answer. They had chosen each other every single day through good times and hard times, and they had never stopped being grateful for the chance to do so. The Wild West might have been a harsh and unforgiving place, but it was also a land of second chances and new beginnings. Carter and Beatrice were living proof that no matter how dark things got, there was always the possibility of light if you were brave enough to reach for it and kind enough to offer your hand to someone else reaching back. Their story was one of love and redemption, of finding home in another person, and of building a life worth living from the ashes of despair. And in the end, that was the greatest story of all.